Lets it fly. RIDICULOUS. Ridiculous.
They're going to have to trade the run for the out. The throw over to third. Ball game.
Wow. The fifth year to try and put it away with an ace. That's a storybook ending.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back. Here's episode 41 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. There were all the huge trades and free agent signings in the MLB last week. Most of them were awesome and player-friendly and really long. First up today, we'll hit on all the awesome sports on Christmas Day. There were the NFL games on Netflix that probably shouldn't have been blowouts on paper, and the NBA had this really audacious quintuple header that turned out to be pretty awesome. Let's talk about the complaints people had about them and how the almighty dollar factors into it. Then we had Fantasy Football Friday number 9. A keen-eyed reader might have noticed that I had them misnumbered even in the titles of the episodes, but I've since gone back and fixed them all. That means that in this episode, we will have Fantasy Football Friday number 10. The playoffs continue, and now we all have our eyes on championships. Let's think, what real-life scenarios are impacting the biggest fantasy game changers? There's a ton of playoff scenarios that are going to change usage, and some great players might even be rested in the last couple of weeks. Let's talk about all of that and some emergency contingencies. Now, one thing you learn if you watch sports long enough, if LeBron says it, it must be true, right? Did anybody watch the Lakers-Warriors game on Christmas night? This one game is not the focus by any means, but just the briefest synopsis goes like this. LeBron and Steph had another really classic battle. Anthony Davis picked up an ankle injury in the first quarter and didn't play the rest of the way. Austin Reeves, the Lakers point guard, had a triple-double and a game-winning layup with 1 second left. Naturally, LeBron was still the one to get interviewed first, and right at the end of that interview, he says this, "Well, I love the NFL, but this is our day," referring to Christmas. The NBA Christmas tradition is awesome, of course, but he was also referring to this year's NFL slate. Let's think about those games, the Chiefs, Steelers, and Ravens-Texans games. The big gripe that players and coaches have had about the scheduling here. They all had to play 3 games in 11 days, Sunday the 15th, Saturday the 21st, and of course Christmas Day. Pat Mahomes spoke out against it, and because the Steelers had this same scheduling quirk, Ben Roethlisberger, who I hadn't heard anything about essentially since the day he retired, did too. Ben's quote was, "It's miserable. It's a shame that the league does this. It just shows that it's all about money, and this is a way that they can, make more money and figure this thing out because it's not for the players." What the internet has given as evidence that this kind of scheduling quirk isn't so crazy is partly that the two better teams went 3-0 and dominated during that stretch, being the Chiefs and the Ravens. I counter that right away by saying the Chiefs were without Chris Jones, probably the best defensive tackle in the league. The Ravens were missing depth at their running back and receiver spots. It's week 17 in the NFL, right? Every team has players on IR and on their current injury report. If you saw the Ravens defensive coordinator, Zach Orr, try to do a little flying chest bump on the sideline after a 4th down stop, the Ravens were almost down a coach, too. That was pretty hysterical. Back to the scheduling. The holiday games are awesome if you ask me, and Netflix paid $150 million for the rights to broadcast just these 2 games. I don't think it comes down entirely just to money. But as consumers, we know that incomprehensible amounts of money change hands in the league every year. Pat Mahomes has the largest contract ever for an NFL player, which he totally deserves, but it sort of muffles the message, right? When somebody who's paid that much complains about player safety, even more so maybe with the rules protecting quarterbacks in the pocket getting so tightly enforced nowadays. Do I like the NFL holiday slate as it sits now and holiday games in general, thinking back to the NBA, and could they play a college football bowl game? I say yeah, do it all. There is downtime in pretty much every holiday, hopefully, that you can fill by watching a game. The NFL's not going to give up on the Black Friday or Christmas or Thanksgiving games anytime soon, so we should probably get used to them. Are players' families affected by these games? Of course they are, but they're affected every week by every game, and I'd imagine most of them lived comfortably enough to kind of bite their tongues. If you're talented enough to get paid a ton to do your job, then you kind of just have to go to work, right, when your name's on the schedule. Sure, the holiday games might feel like kind of working overtime, and teams could consider some sort of game check bonus for the holidays, but there's always those insanely lavish gifts that the players get each other. There's always endorsement deals that popular players can use to make a lot more money even than they do with their contracts. I don't think the league is going to walk back the whole campaign about expanding its reach between all the international games, playing on almost every day of the week, and giving out their media rights to so many different streaming platforms. To put a bow on it here in the post-Christmas episode, there is probably some degree of increased risk for any team that plays on short rest, but the league doesn't have any incentive to change their direction. Now on to Fantasy Football Friday number 10. It was such a mixed bag. If you're like me and across your two different leagues, you played Cooper Kupp and Jonathan Taylor, you really don't know how to feel, right? JT had almost 40 points and scored 3 touchdowns just last week, and then Cooper Kupp over a 2-game stretch caught 3 total for 24 yards. If you played certain guys the first couple of rounds, you're almost guaranteed to be moving on. Others probably ended your season. No matter what final place you're fighting for, let's give you a few tips for the last roughly week and a half here of the fantasy season. I'll start with playoff implications. Somewhat inspired by the Chiefs taking the number 1 seed in the AFC again by beating the Steelers on Christmas. I'll spell it out here as clearly as I can. You should almost never play anyone when their team has nothing to play for. There are teams that will fully rest all of their starters for the last week or two if they can't improve their standings. Teams that will probably be doing that, I think the Bills are a really good current example. They're almost guaranteed to have the number 2 seed, and they play the Jets on Sunday. If they win that one, they will be locked into the number 2 spot. Josh Allen obviously has been amazing in fantasy and in real life, but I'm leaning toward not starting him in Week 18. The Bills will probably beat the Jets, and then they have nothing to play for. My backup option is going to be Baker Mayfield, and the Bucs desperately need to win out, so I like that idea. Other teams that I believe could make a choice like this, that is maybe resting their starters in Week 18, the Texans, Packers, Chargers, and Commanders. Those are a few that aren't quite locked into their spot yet at the time I'm recording, but they probably will be after this week's slate of games, some of them whether they win or lose. That's just kind of how big the gap is between the haves and the have-nots this year, you know? There's very few questions about which teams belong in which category. Anyway, star players from any one of these teams might have to be on your bench, and if you're in the finals, then have fun with that. Try to find accomplished backups that have been starters in the league before, or players who've performed way above expectations in backup roles this year. I'm tempted to throw out some names like, say, Robert Woods at receiver for the Texans or J.K. Dobbins at running back for the Chargers. They both kind of fit that bill of the former, right? Established players that have done some good things in the league, and they have the advantage of injuries in front of them on the depth chart. The Seahawks' Zach Charbonnet will be taking over their number 1 running back role after Kenny Walker got put on IR on Christmas Day, by the way. Worst gift ever. And Charbonnet is dynamite, by the way. If you have time to get him on waivers before this Thursday versus the Bears, or even before Week 18, highly recommend it. But I got a feeling he's probably going to be rostered. I still fully believe he's the best backup running back in the league, and he's scored 6 touchdowns in 4 starts coming into the Thursday night game this week. If you're playing a guy that's on an eliminated team, I think this can be even more tricky. Many teams just give up and roll over, right? Like the Jaguars and the Giants have done. They don't bring in a veteran quarterback when they're young and turnover-prone quarterback can't move the ball. They don't try to have any balance run and pass. They don't make good game and clock management choices, etc. At least a few teams have defied that trend, though, this year. And as a fantasy manager, I got to say I'm happy that the Jets are one of them. Davante Adams is the leading receiver in the entire league the last 4 weeks with over 100 PPR points. It's been one of the most dominant stretches any receivers had this year, and it's mostly come since the Jets were knocked out. They're almost certainly going to give the Bills a pretty good game. And one more reason why I love Davante Adams as well as Garrett Wilson, their top 2 receiving options. Aaron Rodgers needs one more touchdown pass for 500 on his career, and he's definitely aware of that. He tried to force it last week with Adams, but I fully expect one of these 2 guys will get that this week, and that they'll both get probably double-digit targets. One final waiver wire target is the Cowboys' Jalen Tolbert. Dallas has been eliminated, and they just announced Thursday that they're shutting down their number one receiver, CeeDee Lamb, for the year with a shoulder injury. You could see watching any Cowboys game, he kept nursing it, but it's just one of those injuries. You can't baby it or protect it while you're trying to actually play football at real speed. He would give himself up and go down instead of fighting for extra yards, which is not the kind of receiver that he is, and now the team has just decided it's not worth the risk anymore. Now, numbers I like about Jalen Tolbert. He should be the number one receiver for the Cowboys the next 2 weeks, and he has 8 touchdowns on 66 career catches. That's an awesome rate. He hasn't had a 100-yard game yet this year, but CD was taking up, 10 to 15 targets every week. So I think if you need an injury replacement, you can roll with him. A few rapid and more general tips. Remember all the different days of the week that games are going to happen on. That's so fun. I just love to say it. You should have up until the scheduled kickoff time of the game that your player is in to make lineup changes. I've had a couple of changes of heart in the last couple of minutes or seconds before games kicked off, and I've benefited from getting some of those changes in on time. Of course, keep scanning waivers and playing keep away like I should have done with Zach Charbonnet. Check for anyone that might be coming back from IR for the final game or two. The Chiefs actually just had a really good example. They got their possible number one receiver, Hollywood Brown, back last week. Believe in matchups, but even more so, believe in the pedigree of the player. And lastly, anybody whose team is really desperate and who gets a ton of volume, whether it's carries, targets, pass attempts, or any combination, is a good starter. Good luck, take all of that, win your league, or get the best possible placing you can. And, sometimes we predict the Thursday night games, sometimes we recap them. This is more of a recapping week. Oh boy. Bears and Seahawks, the lowest scoring and arguably most pathetic game of the year, 6-3. The Bears' number one pick, Caleb Williams, believe it or not, came very close to the all-time record for consecutive passes thrown without an interception, only ending it on the Bears' last play while he was, heavily pressured and chucking it up. He was sacked 7 times. That was absolutely no surprise. The guys ahead of him on that list for not throwing interceptions, it's just wild. Aaron Rodgers and Tom Brady, the only two. And those guys, think about it. They were breaking records and winning double-digit games every year, while Caleb's at the head of one of the worst offenses in the league and has lost 10 in a row. The last time he had thrown a pick was Week 6 against the Jags. I tell you, though, why this is misleading. He had a 4-game streak with no touchdown passes right after that game, and his longest completion of the year is 45 yards. Plus, I heard he completed 1 pass the entire Thursday night game more than 6 yards down the field. He hasn't shown to be a great deep ball thrower yet, so they kind of don't let him try it. The Bears can't run the ball. We knew that. They have undoubtedly one of the worst offensive lines in pass and run blocking. 25th in the league in scoring. They're just not a good football team. They're so far away from contending. And I think a lot of people assumed they were going to be, 8-9, 9-8, something that's not terrible and have a chance at a wild card. Not really. The one bit of news that I just heard about the Bears, Pete Carroll, the very long-time Seahawks head coach, is interested in coming out of his kind of semi-retirement and interviewing for their head coach job next year. If it isn't the Lions offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, I think Pete Carroll could actually be their next best option. If anything comes of that rumor, it's obviously something that they have to pursue. And if somebody could turn that franchise around, yeah, Pete Carroll, he's a good choice. So the Bears have had nothing to play for a while, but Seattle's been sweating it out every week. Let's talk about them. They're now a 9-7 team in what's become one of the worst divisions in the league this year, the NFC West. They lost 2 straight at the wrong time coming into this Thursday, but both against quality opponents, the Packers and Vikings. Their only scenario really to win the division now, at least the only one that kind of has any chance, they already got the win here Thursday night, and now they need to win next week against the Rams, and ideally have the Rams lose this Saturday against the Cardinals. If any of that doesn't happen, Seattle's out anyway, so all a moot point. The worst part is there's no way that the Seahawks can get a wild card. You've got the Packers, the Commanders, and the Vikings who are all guaranteed to finish with better records than them and will probably be, the 3 combined best records of wild card teams ever, if you will. Tampa Bay and Atlanta is the other really close division race in the NFC. I believe the Bucks would currently be the 7 seed and the Hawks would be the first ones out of the playoffs. There is good news for the Seahawks as well, though. I couldn't believe it when I checked the league stat leaders today, but Jackson Smith-Njigba, their supposed kind of number 3 receiver, he's 5th in the league in yardage, 7th in receptions, and he went over 1,000 yards last week. And he's going to be drafted way higher in fantasy drafts next year. Geno Smith is always a serviceable quarterback, and now after the Thursday night game, he's 2nd in the league in yardage, only to Joe Burrow. He's ahead of guys like Mahomes, Baker, Jared Goff, Josh Allen. They have good veterans at punter and kicker, so their special teams are solid. Maybe the biggest numbers holding Seattle back, it's just the turnover margin. They have the explosive passing game and the experience to get through, even to beat the Rams in Week 18. Only question is, how bad do they want it, and how well do they execute in that Rams game when they have to have it? The Rams are hot, and I think everybody should be scared of them. Another little historical note that is somewhat up for grabs, technically, Caleb Williams needed 571 yards coming into the Thursday night game in order to set the Bears' franchise record for a season passing, and again, only as a rookie. The Bears, you might have heard this before, are the only team that have never had a 4,000-yard passer. Unfortunately, Caleb threw for 122. He would need 449 yards in Week 18. It's not entirely impossible. Obviously, teams have gone over that. Quarterbacks have gone over that. And yet it would take, by leaps and bounds, the greatest game he's played this year. I don't think the Bears have the weapons all around him to do it. I hope they let him try, let him have 50-plus attempts and take a bunch of deep shots in Week 18. I would not bet on it at all, but it's something to keep in mind. And even so, Williams' rookie season is going to be considered a success. He's only thrown 6 interceptions, 19 touchdown passes right now. Of course, the offense is poor. That just doesn't always come down to a quarterback, and you could really tell it by the way he got sacked 7 times against the Seahawks, who don't really have an elite pass rush. Every time they sent 5 or 6, somebody was coming in totally clean. It's insane, and it's not getting any better until they really nail the draft and some player development stuff. A lot more to do in Chicago before they get where they need to be. So that's everything I have for the week. When we next speak, I hope to be a week closer to a first and a third place finish in my 2 fantasy playoffs. I hope to get my grades back and 4-point my second term in my Masters. And I don't know, maybe take over the world in that time, who knows? It'll also be after the new year, so I'll hit all this at once. Whatever catches my eye, as you know, it's always on the table. And remember, feel free to hit me on my socials if you have an idea for me. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and an enjoyable whatever holiday you prefer. This has been episode 41 of White Noise Sports with Tanner White. Thanks for joining me.
Upfield, lets it fly. RIDICULOUS. Ridiculous.
They're going to have to trade the run for the out. The throw over to third. Ball game.
Wow. The 5th year to try and put it away with an ace. That's a storybook ending.